Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as I share 12 of my favorite early spring blooming perennials. So let's go. I live in New Hampshire. I garden in zone 5B, and based on my zip code, my average last frost date is around May 15th. Here where I live, pretty much nothing is blooming from the months of November, December, January, February, and March. That is 5 out of 12 months of the year. The first blooms that I actually see are sometime from the beginning to middle of April. And that's also when the pollinators start coming out looking for food. So I really do try to pack my yard with a number of different flowers, not only for interest for myself because I want to see things blooming, but also so that the pollinators have something to get food from. Many of the plants that I'm going to share with you are what are considered spring ephemerals. What that means is they bloom in the spring, but as the weather gets warmer, they die back to the ground. The leaves just wither, and you can actually pull back the leaves. You won't even know that there was a plant there come middle of summertime. But the plant is still there, it's still alive. You just don't see anything from the soil level up. But from the soil level down, the roots are still alive. And even though these plants don't bloom for me until beginning of April, depending on your climate, your location, they may bloom earlier for you. So just keep that in mind. Did you know many plants out there are toxic if you, a family member, or a pet ingests them? So you don't want to be in the habit of ingesting any parts of any of these plants that I'm going to tell you about. Be sure to stay until the end because I do have a few honorable mentions. And also, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please consider subscribing. It's free to you. Don't forget to hit the notification bell because you don't want to miss any new videos that I have. And if you like my content, feel free to share it with a friend or a family member that might also enjoy this type of content. I do want to share with you, I was looking at old video footage of garden tours that I did in early April, and that's actually where I got this list of plants from because all these plants were blooming during that time. We're going to start with one of my favorites. It's a plant that I bet a lot of you have never heard of, but once you see how pretty it is, you may consider wanting it in your garden. It's called the spring larkspur, also known as fumewort or bird in a bush. It has a blue-green fern-like foliage that forms nice clumps, and then sugar pink tubular blooms appear with a flash of white on the spurs. It would look very pretty in a woodland area or partly shaded bed or rock garden. One fun fact about this plant is that it's part of the poppy family. Instead of roots, it actually has what you would call a bulb or a tuber, and then off of that, the roots form. And I have this planted in a number of places in my yard. I have it along my front walkway, and I have it mixed in with a bunch of other really pretty plants that bloom in the springtime. I also have it along my side walkway, and I recently moved it to these areas because I found that it's a shorter type plant and I really want to enjoy it. So that's why I have it in areas where I can actually see it. And then the final place that I have it is in my south lawn garden. It looks really pretty in there. I do have some other plants that bloom in the springtime too, so the nice pink colors of this plant complement those plants nicely. It's hardy in zones 4 through 9. It blooms early spring. It gets to be about 4 to 8 inches tall. It prefers part shade to full shade. You want to plant it in the fall time. It will naturalize for you. It's deer and rabbit resistant. It's great in the landscape or in a container. It attracts bees. And it is ephemeral, which means it goes dormant during the summer. And then it's native from the Balkans all the way down to Scandinavia. This next plant, I bet some of you have heard of, but I bet there's also some of you that have never heard of it. It's called lungwort or pulmonaria. It's a clumping ground cover with fuzzy green speckled basal leaves and funnel-shaped flowers in blue and pink. After lungwort or pulmonaria is done blooming, its foliage becomes the main attraction. The plant's low-growing speckled leaves add visual interest throughout the rest of the growing season. This fun fact that I'm going to share with you was very interesting. The spots on lungwort leaves are actually air pockets that may help cool the leaf itself. There are a lot of varieties out there. I don't know which variety I have. I got it from my mother-in-law's. I have a couple of guesses, but I'm not 100% sure. I have it in a number of places in my yard. One place is on the east side of my house where I have a hosta garden. It's at the very base of that garden. I put it there for visual interest, but also it's kind of like a temporary holding bed where as the plant spreads, I can take from there and move it around my yard, which is nice. I also have this plant up along my driveway on the right, which I refer to as my south lawn garden. It's on the south side of my house. and I have quite a few plants out there as well. Now that area gets quite a bit of sun, and I will be having a tree removed, so it's even going to have more sun. If I feel that the plant is not thriving this spring, I'll be happy to just dig up all those plants and move them to other areas of my yard, because I do have a lot of shade in other sections of my yard. Pulmonaria is hardy in zones 3 through 9. It blooms late winter to early spring. It gets to be about 10 inches tall. It likes part shade to full shade. It is deer and rabbit resistant, and it attracts bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds. And depending on the variety, it's native in Europe, Western Asia, and Central Asia. You'll find in a lot of my videos, by the way, that a lot of the plants from my yard started as a small sprig of a plant that I got from my mother-in-law. And this next plant is definitely one of them. It's called Bloodroot, also known as Sanguinaria canadensis. This wildflower grows by rhizomes. The leaves appear first, and then they unfurl. It has white flowers with yellow stamens. You'll find that the blossom is open on a sunny day, but if it's a cloudy day or getting later in the day into the evening, the flowers will close up. I don't mind that Bloodroot only blooms for just a few days because it's so pretty when it is blooming. After the blooms fade, it does have very nice foliage, and actually the foliage gets taller and taller into the summer months. But then during the heat of the summer, the plant goes dormant, and you can cut back the leaves because they don't look good during that time. And once again, this plant would be often referred to as a spring ephemeral. Here's a fun fact. After the plant has gone to seed, you might find a lot of ants around the plant, and I'm going to tell you why. The ants distribute bloodroot seeds by carrying them over back to their nest. The seeds have a fleshy organ all around them, and that fleshy organ is attractive to ants. These insects disperse the seeds when they carry them back to their nest. The ants eat that fleshy organ. After they're done with that, they don't actually care or want the seed itself, and they just throw the seed away. They put it in basically their dump or their trash area, and wherever that seed is, it's going to basically all of a sudden grow. So you might be surprised when you find bloodroot growing in different parts of your yard. That's probably why. It's what was left over from an ant that carried it away. When it comes to the flower itself, there are single blooming as well as double blooming varieties out there. The ones that I have are only the single, but I do want to get my hands on a double if I can. And I've divided and moved this plant all over my yard. I have it along the driveway on the right on my south garden. It looks really pretty in there. I also have it up along my front walkway, and I even have it up along my side walkway. So I have it actually in a number of places in my yard where I can really enjoy it. Bloodroot is hardy in zones 3 through 8, and it blooms early to mid-spring. It gets to be about 6 to 10 inches tall. It likes part sun to shade. It is deer and rabbit resistant. It attracts the bees as well as the butterflies, and it is native to Eastern and Central North America. This next one also came from my mother-in-law's, and I didn't know what it was, and thankfully a few of you told me in one of my garden tours the name of this plant. It is called Scilla bifolia rosea. It's also referred to as Alpine squill. It has lightly packed spires of coral pink buds, each one bursting open into a pretty star-shaped white flower. It looks great when planted in a group or a drift. And that's really important with this particular plant because it is so super teeny tiny. You definitely want to have a whole bunch of them so that they can make an impact. An interesting fun fact I found about this plant is that it is part of the asparagus family. So right now I only have this plant on the north side of my house, and I call that a temporary holding bed for a lot of my spring bulbs. And I will be moving this particular plant to a lot of other areas of my yard. But I'm going to be careful where I move it. I want to have it where I can really see it because it is such a little plant. So I don't want it to get lost where it is. So I will be moving them this spring after they bloom closer to my walkway because I'll be walking by them every day and then I can enjoy them. Alpine squill is hardy in zones 3 through 8. It blooms early to mid-spring. It is only 3 to 6 inches tall. I told you it's very short, very sweet. It likes full to part sun. It is deer and rabbit resistant. It attracts the pollinators, which is very important during that time of year. Alpine squill is native to the lower mountain areas from Central and Southern Europe and then south to Turkey as well as Syria. The next one is a type of squill also. This one I did buy from a store, and I bought it for the intention of wanting to put it in different parts of my yard because it looks so different, so interesting. I haven't really seen this in a lot of places. It's called striped squill. The flowers are pale blue with a darker blue line in the middle, and it's a great naturalizer for a bulb lawn. And that's going to be true for a lot of plants I'm telling you about today. So if you do want to put in a bulb lawn, some of these would be great candidates for that. In case you're wondering where did this plant get its name, here's a fun fact for you. The plant is named after a Russian botanist who had the last name Pushkin. He discovered it in the Caucasus region in 1805. I have this plant on the north side of my house in my temporary holding bed. I will be moving it out of there. I'm not sure where I'm going to put it yet, but I do think it's so pretty. I'm not sure how many bulbs are there. It has naturalized a little bit since I planted it a few years ago, which is so exciting. So when I dig up all of these plants, I'll definitely be dividing them and then putting them in their new homes. Striped squill is hardy in USDA zones 3 through 9. It blooms early to mid-spring and gets to be 6 to 8 inches tall. It prefers full to part sun, and it is deer and rabbit resistant. It attracts the bees and the butterflies. It's native to the Caucasus, Turkey, northern Iran, and Lebanon. This next plant is a fun one. It's called Glory of the Snow. It comes in actually a few different varieties, a few different colors. I got both of these from my mother-in-law's home, so I'm not sure which variety I have, but if I had to guess based on some pictures I saw, I have what I believe are the Blue Giant as well as the Violet Beauty. For the Blue Giant, they are blue flowers in the shape of little stars, and for the Violet Beauty, they are pink and violet flowers that are also star-shaped. Both of them have a white eye, and both of them would also be really nice in a bulb lawn because they naturalize very readily. So here's a fun fact for you, and it's more out of experience, or at least from what I've seen. You don't want to weed around these bulbs. And the reason I say that is the bulbs are teeny tiny. They are super small. And the minute you start weeding around these bulbs, there's a good chance that you are moving the bulbs all around your yard. And I know this from experience, not personal experience. When I used to go visit my mother-in-law and go to her home in the springtime, it was beautiful. She had a huge blanket of these plants all over her garden. Now, fortunately, she only kept these plants around her little pond that she had in her backyard, but they were everywhere around that pond. I never got a chance to ask her why were they everywhere. I mean, it looked pretty, but I suspect every single time she weeded that area around the pond, which was quite a large area, she was moving around these bulbs. And because of that, I used to think, wow, these plants must go to seed and just spread themselves everywhere. That has not been my experience because I do have a number of these plants in my yard because I got a few bulbs from her home and I've just divided and moved them over the years. And they have really stayed in their nice little clumps. So just be careful. If you do get this plant, it's not a bad thing. Just make sure you're not going crazy with weeding all around it because you might be moving those bulbs everywhere. And it's not the end of the world if you did, by the way, because come springtime, you can easily dig up the sprigs that have sprouted and move them back and keep them wherever you want. It's really a matter of personal preference, to be honest with you. Some people like that look of these plants blooming everywhere, and some people just want them more contained. I have Glory of the Snow in a number of places in my yard. I know I definitely have them on the north side of my house where I have a circular rose garden. I've planted quite a few of Glory of the Snow in there. And then I know I also have Glory of the Snow in my front yard, which is on the west side of my house. I have some planted down in that area as well. And then I also have some planted on the south side of my house. Where my side walkway is, I have some in that bed as well, along with a lot of other spring bulbs. Glory of the Snow is hardy in USDA zones 3 through 9. It blooms early to mid-spring and gets to be 4 to 10 inches in height. It prefers full to part sun, and the plants are deer as well as rabbit resistant. The bees love this plant, and this plant is native in western Turkey. The next plant is called Lenten rose, but many of us know it as hellebores. There are a lot of different varieties and a lot of different colors. The ones that I have are a dark wine color, as well as a white colored one that has some pink color speckled inside the center of it. I don't know which varieties they are. I did buy them from a garden center, and when I do a spring tour, if I can find the tags, I'll be sure to put the names of the varieties in my spring tour video. I will tell you, this plant is not cheap, and I thought about not buying it because I just don't like to spend a lot of money on plants, to be honest with you. But it was a plant that I really wanted. I have so much shade in my yard, and I thought it would look really pretty. So I did splurge, and I have bought 2 over time, but I've been very good about dividing those plants over the last few years. I've made videos showing my process for dividing hellebores. I'll put it down in the description below. But if you do want a hellebore, just know that a lot of sites will say you're not supposed to divide it. I have successfully divided the plant, so it is doable. So here's an interesting fact that I found about hellebores. The flowers that you see on hellebores, they're actually not flowers. I know that sounds weird, right? They're called sepals, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but I'll put the name on the screen. So they're not actually petals. The sepals are petal-like, and they surround a ring of small nectaries, which are modified petals that hold nectar. I don't know, I thought all of that was really interesting. I wanted to share it with you, but if I do a garden tour and I have a hellebore, I'll just show you what I call as the flower. Because I've divided the 2 hellebore plants that I had, I do have the plant now in a few areas of my yard. I have it on the north facing side of my home. I have a few plants over there, and then I also have a few plants on the east side of my home, right near my hosta garden. Hellebores are hardy in USDA zones 3 through 9. They bloom from late winter through springtime, but that's totally going to depend on your climate as well as the variety of hellebore that you're growing. They grow 1 to 2 feet in height, and they prefer part sun to shade. They are deer and rabbit resistant, and they do attract bees. And then finally, hellebores are native to parts of Europe as well as Asia. The next plant I'm so excited to have in my yard because I wanted it for a number of years, and I finally went to the store and bought some bulbs just to start off with a few bulbs, and then over time hopefully it naturalizes and I can divide it and move it around. It is called snowdrops, and snowdrops produce dainty nodding white flowers, and these plants love to naturalize to form a colony, and they also look wonderful if you're trying to create a bulb lawn. A fun fact that I didn't know and I wanted to share with you was that snowdrops belong to the amaryllis family. I did have the snowdrops planted on the north side of my house in a temporary holding spot, and it was there for a few years. Finally, last year, after it bloomed, I made a video and I showed you my process for digging up those snowdrops, and together we moved them over towards the south side of my house near my side walkway, because I wanted to make sure that I could actually enjoy them when they came up and when they bloomed. So I'm really excited. I can't wait for this spring to see what they look like in that new area. Snowdrops are hardy in USDA zones 3 through 7. They bloom pretty early. It can be any time from late winter through middle of spring. Again, it's going to depend on the variety as well as your climate. They get to be only 4 to 10 inches tall, which is one of the many reasons why I moved them to an area where I can enjoy them. They thrive in full to part sun, and they are deer and rabbit resistant. The bees love this plant, and the plant is native in Southern Europe as well as Asia Minor. The next plant I want to talk about is crocus. From orange, yellow, white, purple. Some have stripes inside the center of them, and some are just solid color. They do naturalize, and they would look great in a bulb lawn also. My fun and interesting fact about crocuses is that they are part of the iris family. I'm not going to lie about this plant. I have no idea at this point where I have it in my yard. I know that I originally only had it on the north side of my house in my temporary holding bed. But then together, and I should look back at old videos, together I'd made videos digging up a bunch of those crocuses and moving them. I believe I moved a bunch of them to the south side of my house near my side walkway, and I'm almost sure I planted a whole bunch of crocuses in my old arborvitae flower bed. But nevertheless, we'll find out together when I do an April garden tour and I show you where all my bulbs are blooming. Crocuses are hardy in USDA zones 3 through 8. They bloom in the spring, and they grow to be about 4 to 6 inches in height. They thrive in full sun to part sun. And I'm not going to lie, from what I researched, they are not deer, rabbit, rodent, mouse, you name it, resistant. Animals do like to dig them up. They like to eat them. They like to play around with them. So if you do want crocuses in your yard, just be mindful of that, and you may need to protect the bulbs when you're planting them. Put some sort of mesh wire over them, or only plant them in pots. But just beware that the rodents do like crocus bulbs. The bees like to get the nectar from crocuses, and the plants are native in certain parts of Europe, Africa, as well as Asia. The next plant is muscari, also known as grape hyacinth. I remember when I first got this plant, I dug up the smallest little patch from my mother-in-law's home. I've never bought this plant before. And if you've watched any of my old videos in the springtime and you see how many plants I have in my yard of grape hyacinth, I'm telling you, I literally only had a small clump of it. Every single year, I dig up and I keep dividing and moving this plant around my yard. I love it so much. I think it's so pretty. I want this all over my yard. So this spring, I'll be doing the same thing. I'll be digging more of this up. Grape hyacinth has tight clusters of blue flowers that resemble grapes, and they're also available in other colors like white, pink, lavender, or yellow. I did buy a packet of a different colored grape hyacinth. I believe it was pink colored, and I have it in my temporary holding spot on my north side of my home. And I like it, but I don't know if I love it. It just doesn't seem to be naturalizing quickly. And I think the fact that it's kind of hidden on the north side, I don't really enjoy it. I'll definitely be digging that up and moving it closer to the south side where I can actually see it. But I am curious to see if it ends up naturalizing a little bit better on that side of the house. But I can tell you from experience that pink colored one that I have, it almost looks like white. It's like a light pink color. It's growing very slowly. It's not naturalizing. I'm not sure if I love it. I still need to give it a little bit of time. So like I mentioned, I've moved this plant all around my yard. I definitely have it on the south side of my house. I have it around some rocks where I also have a whole bunch of daffodils planted. It looks really pretty in that whole area when all the bulbs are blooming. That pop of purple or blue color looks so beautiful next to all the other colors in that area. I also have a bunch of this plant planted up along my front walkway, and it looks so pretty when I have the spring larkspur in bloom as well as the bloodroot blooming. Grape hyacinths are hardy in USDA zones 4 through 8. They bloom in the springtime. They grow to be about 6 to 9 inches in height, and they prefer full to part sun. The plants are deer and rabbit resistant, and they do attract bees as well. And then finally, grape hyacinth is native in Europe as well as Asia. Now, I've talked a lot about spring bulbs as well as some perennial plants that bloom early April here where I live. I want to talk about a shrub or a bush that looks really pretty as well. It's called Forsythia. Some people also refer to it as golden bells. This is the first shrub to actually flower in my yard. It has long branches that fill with brilliant yellow blooms early in the spring, and it blooms for almost 2 weeks before you see any leaves emerging from the shrub. I have a couple of fun facts on this one. I just couldn't narrow it down to one. The first fact is that Forsythias are part of the olive family, and I thought that was pretty interesting. And another fun fact that I recall for a long time, ever since I was a kid, is if you do want to put down a pre-emergent on your lawn, you want to keep some weeds at bay, you want to do that when the Forsythias are just starting to bloom in your yard. So I know that a lot of landscaping companies and even home gardeners, if they do want to put down a pre-emergent on their lawn, they wait to see that the Forsythias are in bloom, and that's an indicator that now is the time to put down a pre-emergent on their lawn. I have Forsythias all around my yard. I have a couple of different varieties. One I know I got from my mother-in-law, so I don't know what kind it is. And then another one I had bought, I believe, at a big box store on clearance. I can tell you that I at least have 2 varieties. I might have more, but I definitely have 2. One of the Forsythias definitely has a better habit to it, a growth habit, than the other one. One has a more upright habit, and I really like that, the look of it. And the other one is definitely more of a wild habit. The branches get very long, and as the branches touch the ground, the plant basically roots itself everywhere. So unless I'm really good about pruning that Forsythia every single year, what happens is I end up with baby plants or suckers all over, which is not always a bad thing if you're trying to fill areas of your yard with Forsythia, but that is something to be mindful of. Forsythias are hardy in USDA zones 5 through 9, and they bloom in the springtime. They get to be anywhere from 2 all the way up to 10 feet in height, and they prefer full to part sun. The plants are deer resistant, and the flowers attract the bees as well as the butterflies. And then finally, Forsythias are native to Europe as well as Asia. This last one, I wondered if I should add it to the list, but I love this plant and I just had to put it on here. And I'm going to tell you why I wasn't sure if I should add it on here or not. So the plant is called forget-me-not. I've had it for many years in my yard because if you know anything about forget-me-not, if you buy the plant and it goes to seed, you can never get rid of it, which I don't think is a bad thing as long as you're on top of keeping it in check and keeping control of it. I consider it a biennial. I've always thought that it's a biennial, but if you research a little bit more about it, some places will call it a short-lived perennial. So if you're growing forget-me-not from seed, let's say, it's not going to bloom that first year. It will just put on growth at the base of the plant, but it won't bloom. But then the following year, it will bloom for you. It'll be a beautiful color of blue or pink or white, and then it will set seed. It'll drop its seeds everywhere. That plant that bloomed will die, and then it's almost like a foxglove or a hollyhock, a lot of other plants that do the same type of thing. But at this point in my yard, I have it so that it's blooming every single year, which is really, really nice. The plant has pink buds followed by small, attractive, numerous half-inch, 5-petaled blue, pink, or white flowers. And remember, the plant will reseed itself readily. Some people consider it invasive. So if you don't want the plant to do that, just make sure you deadhead the blossoms after the blossoms have gone by, but before it starts to set seed. So I wanted to share a fun fact with you, but it's not a historical fact or a fact that everyone knows about. It's more of a personal fun fact. A number of years ago, I was selling plants. I didn't have a backyard plant nursery like I do now. It was more just, I was doing it on Craigslist, and every so often, if I was selling a small handful of plants, I would put them on Craigslist. Anyway, I had a whole bunch of the forget-me-nots potted up, and someone reached out, and it was sad. They said that their mom had passed away, and they wanted to make a memorial garden. She wanted to basically make a heart and make it in the shape of the forget-me-nots, blue flowers, and she said it was her mom's favorite flower. And I just found that story so touching, so sweet. I was very happy to just give her the plants so she could make this memorial garden for her mom. I don't know who that person was, but I really hope that the plant set seeds for them and that she was able to each year have more and more forget-me-nots in her yard in memory of her mom. I have mostly contained this plant to one small flower bed in my yard. It's along the south side of my house. It's in my side walkway garden. And every single year, I just find little baby plants here, there, everywhere. And what I do is I dig them up and I move them around so that they look a little bit more organized, a little bit more uniform, and not so wild and crazy all over that flower bed. And they really do look pretty when they're blooming. And another place that I have them is in a funny place. I have a barn, and right behind the barn, I must have had 1 or 2 plants. Well, those plants have gone to seed, and I have a whole bunch of forget-me-nots that come up every spring back there. So it's a great place for me to go shop my own yard for free plants, dig them up, and I can then put them in a hanging basket, in a container, or wherever I want in my yard. Forget-me-nots are hardy in USDA zones 3 through 8, and that's going to vary depending on the species as well as the cultivar. They bloom in the spring. They don't like to get dried out, so make sure you're giving them plenty of moisture. They get to be 8 inches in height, and they can grow in both sun as well as shade. But if you live in a really hot, dry climate, then it's probably better to be planting these in a shady location. Forget-me-nots are deer as well as rabbit resistant, and they attract bees as well as butterflies. The plants are native in Europe as well as parts of Asia. I will say forget-me-nots are considered invasive in certain areas, so be sure to check where you live before you plant this in your yard. I did a quick search and I did see that forget-me-nots are considered invasive in 3 U.S. states, and those states are Wisconsin, Michigan, as well as Missouri. I was originally going to make this 15 plants that bloom in my yard that I love and that I wanted to share with you. The next 3 are honorable mentions. And the reason I put them as honorable mentions is I feel like of all the plants I've already told you about, these 3 are very, very popular, or they're not considered fully perennial. The first one is daffodils. I mean, I think we all love daffodils. I would say most people that are watching this video have daffodils growing in their yard. So I didn't want to go into too much detail about daffodils because I just feel like it's so popular that it wasn't really worth going into detail about. But absolutely, I have a ton of daffodils in my yard. I absolutely love them. They provide so much color in the springtime in my yard, and I have a lot of different types, and they all bloom at different times of the year. The other one that I didn't mention is hyacinth. I did mention grape hyacinth. This is not grape hyacinth now that I'm talking about. This is just the regular hyacinth. I also love this plant very much. I do have a few of these plants in my yard, and I did want to mention it as an honorable mention plant. And then the final plant I wanted to give an honorable mention to, because I can't not bring it up, are pansies. Pansies are definitely considered an annual here where I live. However, they drop their seeds for me very readily in this one flower bed in my front yard, which is on the west side of my house. And every single year for the last, I'd say 5 years, I have had so many pansies that basically pop up in the springtime. I did not put the seeds in there. The plants that were there self-seeded and basically grew new plants during the summer months. They overwinter, and then in the springtime, I have a ton of pansies. I will say it'll be interesting to see this spring if any of them survive. And the reason I'm saying that is here we are, beginning of January. Our daytime temperatures have been about 20 degrees Fahrenheit, in that range, and nighttime temperatures have been in the teens. And we don't have any snow on the ground. Nothing is insulating or covering those pansies. I could go out there and I could cover them, but honestly, I think this will be a good test to see if the pansies will survive our winter, given that there's no snow cover to insulate those plants. So those are the 12 plants that I wanted to share with you that look so beautiful in my yard during the early spring months. If you know of a plant that is hardy down to zone 5 and will bloom during the early spring months and would look pretty in my yard, I would love to hear from you. Please drop it down in the comment section below. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit the like button below. And until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.